Before we dive into one of the greatest mysteries of natural history, a quick note. Right now, the future of public broadcasting in the United States hangs in the balance. Drastic cuts to PBS funding could endanger programming that educates, inspires, and connects millions of viewers across the country. If you believe in the mission of free public media and live in the U.S., please visit protectmypublicmedia.org to make your voice heard. Your voice matters. Now let's step back in time, way back, to a world unlike any you've ever imagined. Imagine a landscape painted in green and gold, dappled with sunlight piercing through towering ferns and conifer trees that stretch toward a prehistoric sky. In the distance, a low rumble vibrates the earth, not thunder, not tectonic shift, but life. A colossal creature moves slowly across a muddy plain, each step pressing deep into the ground like a living earthquake. Its neck sways like a mast caught in the wind, its tail trailing behind like a whip dragging through time. This is not fantasy, this was reality. And it's time we talked about the giants that ruled it. They were the largest animals ever to walk the earth, larger than any land creature before or since. They defied physics, biology, and our very imagination. And even after nearly 2 centuries of studying their bones, we are still trying to answer the same question. How did sauropods get so unimaginably big? The story begins in 1842 at the dawn of paleontology, when British biologist Richard Owen coined a brand new term. Dinosauria, the terrible lizards. It was an attempt to categorize a growing collection of strange, fossilized reptiles being unearthed from the mines and quarries of an industrializing England. Among these early discoveries were the lumbering Megalosaurus, the beaked iguanodon, and the armored Hylaeosaurus. Together they formed a new and astonishing family of ancient giants. But there was one animal so large, so bizarre, that Owen refused to include it among the dinosaurs. His bones were simply too massive. He believed it could not possibly have lived on land. Instead, he named it Cetiosaurus, the whale lizard, imagining it as a gigantic sea creature, a leviathan from the deep. It was only later that science corrected the mistake. Cetiosaurus and others like it did not swim. They walked. And they belonged to the greatest lineage of land animals ever to exist, the sauropods. We now know that these whale lizards were in fact dinosaurs, but ones of such size and design that they still puzzle the brightest minds. Sauropods included beasts like Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, Apatosaurus, and Argentinosaurus. The latter may have reached lengths of 130 feet and weighed more than 70 tons. That's the weight of 10 adult African elephants, or a fully loaded Boeing 737. To put it in perspective, the largest non-sauropod land animals in Earth's history rarely exceeded 15 tons. Nothing else even comes close. Not rhinos, not mammoths, not even today's elephants. And yet the sauropods thrived, roaming the Mesozoic Earth in herds, browsing treetops, drinking from ancient rivers, living lives that pushed the limits of what biology and physics should allow. It's that impossibility that makes them so fascinating. The more we learn, the stranger the picture becomes. These were creatures with legs like columns, torsos as long as school buses, and necks that could stretch over 30 feet into the canopy. Their hearts had to pump blood stories high into the air, and their lungs had to oxygenate a body the size of a building. Just the act of walking seems unthinkable. And yet they did. For decades, scientists debated whether sauropods could even support their weight on land. Early theories imagined them as aquatic creatures, wading through swamps, their immense bulk held up by water. But fossil evidence, footprints, skeletons, and bone structures, tells a different story. They lived on solid ground. And somehow they walked. That mystery, how something so large could move, has plagued researchers for generations. The key to solving it might lie, surprisingly, in their feet. In 2022, a breakthrough arrived. A team of scientists decided to digitally reconstruct the feet of various sauropod species using 3D modeling. These models allowed them to simulate the weight distribution and stress that would have been placed on the bones during movement. The findings were shocking but enlightening. Without soft tissue cushioning, essentially biological shock absorbers, the bones simply shattered under their own weight. Every time. But add in soft tissue pads, similar to those found on modern elephants, and the scenario changes dramatically. The pressure distributes. The bones survive. The animal walks. It's likely that sauropods had large, fleshy pads on the bottoms of their feet, padding that of course doesn't fossilize and left no direct evidence. But the physics don't lie. Without those structures they couldn't have moved. And it probably didn't stop there. To carry their weight, their legs must have contained complex systems of tendons and ligaments that braced each step, absorbing strain and preventing injury. Their vertebrae, massive, yet laced with air sacs, helped lighten the load. Their respiratory system was likely bird-like, with unidirectional airflow allowing maximum oxygen efficiency. Their bones were pneumatic, meaning hollow in places, giving them strength without bulk. Evolution had engineered them like living suspension bridges, miracles of design pushed to the edge of structural possibility. But moving across prehistoric Earth wasn't the only challenge these giants faced. Reproduction posed another dilemma. How do you produce offspring when your body weighs more than 100,000 pounds? Most modern megafauna are known for intense parental care. Elephants, whales, gorillas, these animals nurse their young, protect them, raise them slowly. But sauropods likely did the opposite. They laid eggs. Lots of them. Possibly dozens or even hundreds, buried in sandy nests, left to incubate under the sun. Tiny hatchlings, barely the size of a house cat, would emerge and grow rapidly. Very rapidly. This was a survival strategy built not on individual care, but on sheer numbers. Out of 100 eggs, perhaps one might survive. But if it did, it could one day become a titan. Rapid growth rates, supported by high metabolisms and possibly even warm-blooded physiology, allowed sauropods to reach adult size in a matter of decades, an astonishing feat considering their scale. And yet they made it work. Across the supercontinent of Pangaea, sauropods ruled for over 100 million years. Their fossils have been found on every continent, even Antarctica. They lived in deserts, floodplains, forests, and volcanic plains. Wherever vegetation could grow, sauropods followed. Their necks allowed them to reach food that other herbivores couldn't. Their sheer size protected them from most predators. Their long tails may have acted like whips for defense, balance, or communication. Every part of them was specialized for gigantism. But their reign did not last forever. When the asteroid struck 66 million years ago, triggering a mass extinction, the sauropods, along with nearly all other dinosaurs, vanished. Only birds, their distant cousins, survived to carry the lineage forward. And yet, the mystery of their size remains. Why them? Why not again? Why haven't mammals or any other lineage since produced creatures of comparable size? What made sauropods so uniquely capable of evolving into land-based skyscrapers of bone and flesh? Perhaps the answer lies in a perfect storm of evolutionary advantages. Lightweight skeletons, efficient lungs, small heads, long necks, and an abundance of food in Mesozoic ecosystems. Perhaps it was a quirk of fate. Or perhaps nature tried something once, succeeded, and never found the need to try again. But we're still digging. Every fossil, every footprint, every 3D model of a toe or vertebra brings us closer to understanding. Not just what they were, but how they were. The sauropods remain an enduring symbol of biological possibility. A reminder that life, when given time and freedom, will reach for the extreme. And sometimes it succeeds. Stay with us because in part 2 we'll go even deeper. We'll explore how sauropods may have changed the very ecosystems they lived in, how their behaviors remain etched in fossilized footprints, and how the race to find the largest dinosaur ever is still very much alive. Because when it comes to the biggest creatures to ever walk this earth, the story has only just begun. But the deeper we look into sauropods' world, the more astonishing, and at times heartbreaking, their story becomes. Because when you live life as a living skyscraper, being born small is an immense liability. For all their power and scale as adults, these prehistoric giants began life as something startlingly fragile. Small, brittle eggs buried in the warm sands of Earth more than 66 million years ago. We now know these eggs were laid in clusters, dozens at a time, scattered across vast nesting grounds spanning continents, from the riverbanks of South America to the floodplains of India. And these weren't just occasional finds. Entire fields of fossilized titanosaur eggs have been uncovered, whispering of an ancient nursery the size of cities, a chaotic yet delicate dance of reproduction on a scale that defies our modern imagination. In 2023, paleontologists digging in central India made an extraordinary discovery: 256 eggs belonging to several species of giant titanosaurs. These fossil nests, some nestled so closely they nearly overlapped, painted a vivid picture of how these creatures brought life into the world. The sauropod strategy wasn't to coddle or protect. It was to overwhelm the odds with sheer numbers. Like sea turtles emerging on a moonlit beach, they likely laid their eggs and then vanished into the forest or floodplain. Not out of neglect but necessity. At over 70 tons, the presence of a mother could have spelled doom for her own young. One misstep, one tail swing, and the fragile life buried below would be crushed before it ever saw the sun. Researchers now believe sauropods followed a lay 'em and leave 'em reproductive model. They didn't build elaborate nests or guard their young like modern birds or mammals. Instead, they used the terrain, shallow pits near lakes or rivers, moist ground that could incubate dozens of eggs in natural heat. This strategy allowed them to avoid accidental destruction while still maximizing their reproductive potential. But it also meant their young were completely on their own the moment they hatched. No guidance. No defense. Just instinct and hope. Imagine it, a newly hatched titanosaur no bigger than a dog, blinking in the sunlight, surrounded by the remains of eggshells and the rustle of underbrush. Every movement could signal danger. Predators, environmental hazards, even other dinosaurs posed constant threats. These hatchlings had to grow fast or perish. And somehow, against the odds, a select few did just that, growing from tiny wide-eyed infants into the largest land animals Earth has ever known. But surviving predators was only the beginning of the challenges ahead. Because while their bodies expanded beyond reason, not everything about sauropods grew in sync. Take their skulls for example. Despite the colossal size of their torsos and tails, sauropods had some of the smallest heads relative to body size of any known dinosaur. Their brains? Even tinier. In fact, many sauropods had brain-to-body ratios so extreme that, if applied to humans, we'd be walking around with minds the size of peanuts. And this wasn't just an odd coincidence, it was a consequence of their most defining feature: those impossibly long necks. Scientists have described this evolutionary trade-off as the head-neck cascade. As sauropod necks lengthened, their skulls had to shrink. It was a matter of physics and balance. Supporting a heavy head at the end of a 6-meter-long neck would have placed immense strain on the vertebrae and muscles. So nature made a compromise. Their skulls became lightweight, their jaws narrow, and their teeth simple, designed more for stripping leaves than processing them. This meant their feeding strategy was all about efficiency. Long necks allowed them to graze across a vast area without moving much, minimizing the energy cost of motion. But in exchange, they gave up any chance of cranial sophistication. And that sacrifice went beyond feeding. A smaller skull meant a smaller brain. Sauropods may have had decent senses, vision, smell, balance, but higher cognitive abilities were likely limited. There's no evidence they coordinated in herds like some ornithopods or used complex calls. Their communication, if it existed, was probably basic. They lived on autopilot, creatures of routine, instinct, and sheer momentum. In many ways they were biological machines designed not for thought but for survival. But even survival had its limits. The enormous size that made sauropods so dominant also made them vulnerable in unexpected ways. For one, their massive bodies created a thermal challenge. While larger animals tend to retain heat better than smaller ones, there's a tipping point where that advantage becomes a danger. Sauropods had a low surface area to volume ratio, meaning they were great at holding heat, but terrible at losing it. Imagine a giant engine running non-stop under the sun, but with no radiator. Overheating wasn't just a possibility, it was an ever-present threat. They couldn't duck into caves. They couldn't sit in the shade of a tree. At 30 meters long, they were taller than most forests and longer than some buildings. So how did they keep cool? In 2019, a team of researchers may have cracked that mystery. By studying the skull canals and blood vessel impressions in fossilized sauropod bones, they discovered something remarkable. Unlike most dinosaurs, sauropods had extensive networks of blood vessels concentrated around the nostrils and inside the mouth. This suggested that they used evaporative cooling, panting, much like dogs do today. As they inhaled and exhaled, moist air passed over blood-rich tissues, pulling heat away from the brain and facial structures. In a sense, they had built-in air conditioners, silently working overtime to keep their brains from boiling under the blazing sun. Still, no system is perfect. Under extreme conditions, even their thermal adaptations might not have been enough. It's possible that many sauropods sought out windswept plateaus or stayed near rivers and lakes to help regulate body temperature. These strategies would have been crucial for creatures whose own biology walked the razor's edge between miracle and malfunction. Looking back nearly 2 centuries, it's almost comical how wrong we initially were about these animals. Richard Owen, the very man who coined the term dinosaur, saw sauropods not as landwalkers but as aquatic behemoths. He named the first one Cetiosaurus, the whale lizard, assuming it must have floated in ancient seas, too heavy to stand on land. And given their sheer bulk, who could blame him? For decades, even after it was clear they were terrestrial, artists drew sauropods wading in lakes with just their heads above water, like lazy reptilian submarines. The idea that they could walk, let alone thrive, on land seemed absurd. But over the years, science corrected its course. Fossilized footprints showed clear weight distribution patterns consistent with land movement. Bone structures confirmed upright stances and strong pillar-like limbs. And modern computer modeling helped unravel how these giants defied gravity without snapping their own bones. The more we learned, the more sauropods transformed from fantasy to fact, from mythical beasts to masterworks of biological engineering. Yet, their very existence still stretches our understanding of what life on Earth can be. These were animals that redefined the rules. They didn't just get big, they got impossible. And their biology had to evolve every step of the way to keep them from collapsing under their own grandeur. Pads on their feet to cushion their steps. Compact heads to balance on long necks. Heat-regulating blood vessels to save their brains. Fast-growing babies abandoned at birth. All of it, every bone, every adaptation, was part of a story not just about size but survival. And perhaps that's the true legacy of the sauropods. Not just their epic proportions or the fossils we marvel at in museums, but the quiet, unyielding persistence they represent. They didn't roar or fight or race. They endured. Through shifting climates, rising predators, and biological bottlenecks, they carried on. Their hearts beat slow and steady, their feet pressed deep into ancient soil, and for millions of years they ruled, not because they were fast or clever but because they were built to last. So the next time you see a sauropod model or a bone fragment in a display case, try to see past the size. Look for the story inside the stone. The tale of creatures so immense they bent the very laws of nature around them. Not monsters but survivors. Not relics but revelations. And somewhere, buried deep beneath layers of time and dust, another nest waits to be uncovered. Another fossilized track waits to be traced. The past is not silent. It's simply patient, waiting for someone to listen.